Do a roll call. Elby,
Shelby Gray Jackson.
take training. Approval of agenda, ma'am.
Move to approve the agenda.
Since there's only you and me here, it's approved. Old business, there is none, new business. Sing Foothills Council Bylaws Appeal. Daryl, do you want to talk to us? Do you want to talk to us about, go ahead, come on up. Go ahead, sir.
Would you please identify yourself for the record?
Yeah, my name is Roger Shaw. I'm a past president of Scenic Foothills Community Council.
Forever.
A long time activist. They're essentially, we had written our, well, let me back up a little bit. We operated for several months under the default bylaws, and during that a lengthy period of time, we had drafted bylaws, we had circulated them, and we actually took a long time before we ultimately passed these bylaws. So they were out there with our members for an extended period of time. When it did come time to pass them, there wasn't a significant amount of discussion. It was, there were a few issues, not overly contentious, but again, just for explanation. When explanations were given about the different parts, everything was essentially unanimously accepted. As required, we submitted them through the assembly, and Mr. Hess did evaluate them. He had looked at them preliminarily and had indicated some issues that he had. We nonetheless believed that the bylaws really were in the form that suited our intent. And as they came in, I think the objections were still sort of raised by Mr. Hess and did come back in an email to us. There were three particular areas that appeared to be in question. One was asserting that we had not demanded regular reports from the treasurer. The other had to do with our restriction on voting, only the voting for the election of the executive board. In that particular case, we had restricted voting to resident members only. And the third item was the suggestion that we add the reference to the municipal code relative to boundaries. Those were the three issues. And my email back, which explained the positions, I'll go really very quickly, I'll actually read here. Scenic Foothills Community Council does not collect dues, generally has no contributions and no expenditures. The bank balance has remained the same for years. The annual report to the council is considered adequate, and the treasurer updates the executive board more frequently. The treasurer is available to respond to any query from any council member. And again, our bank balance has essentially been around $300 for probably about the last 10 years. During that 10-year period of time, there are probably 2 or 3 times that a $300 contribution has come in for a very specific purpose. Those $300 contributions were made by me and specifically to go to the added expense that our webmaster has had over the years in maintaining that. So that's the only money that has gone through our council in the last 10 years, are monies that I have donated for specific purposes. Again, any of our members can ask for a report from the treasurer at any particular time.
But you only do it once a year, is a particular month?
The bylaws, the way we have written these bylaws, only requires the annual report and at other times as deemed necessary. So that really leaves it either to the discretion of the chairman of the executive board or a request from a council member. So there is no means by which we would deny a council member a request for that. It's just not requiring it unless it's, except for the annual report, on a timeline as deemed necessary. The second issue with regard to voting, and we were pretty clear about this. We don't have that many businesses within our area. Business memberships, though, could be someone who does have rental units in the area, a significant number of units. That could possibly be a business member. Other than that, we have Wayland Baptist University, we've got McDonald's there by Totem Theater, and then there by, I think it's Chugach Square, which is where there's a Pilates, and South Central has their stuff. So it is an area which is almost devoid of any commercial interest. But we have had some complaints within our membership in the manner in which we see the business members sometimes have extraordinary influence with the assembly, and we chose to not have that within the community council. A business member is afforded, a business member may speak on all issues, a business member may vote on all issues, except when it comes to the election of the executive board. So that's the only restriction we place on it, and we did so with reason. The other item, the third item about the description of the boundaries, our bylaws have sort of generic wording in there. And one part of it says that our boundaries are whatever are established by the assembly. So anytime there's a boundary change, as there, Mr. Trainee, as you know, is considered right now, possibility of adding some of the university district, if you should so do so, then it's automatically in ours without our having to make any sort of bylaw change. Preceding that particular sort of generic description of boundaries, earlier in sort of the preamble to our bylaws, we essentially say we incorporate by reference all parts of the municipal code, and we cite the code right there. So anyone that wants to look at the code can do so there, and we feel it's unnecessary to have to also include that in our generic description of boundaries. So those are the three items and essentially the positions we've had.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Darrell?
The issue with the boundaries was a suggestion. That does not keep the bylaws from being non-conforming. The last email that I sent on August 18th that listed the three issues I had with the bylaws doesn't include, and you have copies of that email, it does not include any reference to the boundaries. So that's
That's a non-issue?
That's a non-issue. The issue with the treasurer's report, and I did pass out a copy of 2.40.036C, Community Council Boundaries. And on the back of that document, item numbers, pardon me?
Community Council bylaws.
Community Council, what did I say?
Boundaries.
Oh, bylaws, sorry. On the back, number 7 states the management of the council's finances, including, and this is provisions that must be in council bylaws. Council bylaws must be consistent with these 14 items listed under C. So bylaws must contain provisions consistent with the management of the council's finances, including regular status reports and an annual report to the council members on the council's finances, or a compilation of treasurer's reports. And I've been pretty flexible in reviewing council's bylaws. Some councils require every 6 months, some require quarterly. There's one council that only meets the minimum requirements. They meet 4 times a year, once a quarter, and they say a treasurer's report from the previous period. So there's a lot of flexibility, but in the draft Scenic Foothill bylaws, and as otherwise needed, in my opinion, doesn't conform to the code, because the code says regular status reports. So regular to me means you have to identify when they're going to be given. And it's not an onerous burden. The treasurer doesn't, nowhere in the code does it say they have to be written. The treasurer could stand up at a meeting and say, we had 0 contributions this month, we had 0 expenditures, our balance is. But I believe that the code requires, because it says regular status reports and an annual report, it doesn't say or. So in my opinion, as needed isn't consistent with the requirement for a regular status report. The other issue, eligibility to vote, Item number 12, under the same section of
Mr.
code.
Chairman, if I can interrupt, thank you, Mr. Hess, but can we go one by one and then
Okay.
make comments
Go
on
ahead,
it?
Ellie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a comment on the first one, okay? And to the Scenic Foothills Council President, I guess you are.
Pastor.
Yes, okay, fine. What's the big deal? I'm just being really blunt, so put in some language in there, you know, I don't think it's any big deal.
The only big deal right now, Ms. Jackson, is that we would have to go back through the whole process of giving notice and amend the bylaws and everything else. This was considered adequate by our members at the time that it was voted on. So that's the only big issue right now, is the whole process of our having to go back there. You know, the way that, our belief is the way that we have worded is that we determine what is regular. And very clearly, there is nothing in the code that defines regular. So our regular is determined by, we have said, our regularity is determined by request from members or at the pleasure of the chair. So, no, it's not, it's very clear that it's not a big deal. It's just a big deal for us to, I mean, it does take a little bit more effort to give notice of the change and then go through that process. So it just delays it another few months.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Continue, Daryl.
Item number 12, under the same section of code, eligibility to vote. Under A, community council bylaws may require prior meeting attendance at one community council meeting in the preceding 12 months as a prerequisite to voting eligibility. For the election of officers and executive board members, community council bylaws may require prior attendance at one but no more than two community council meetings in the preceding 12 months prior to election. Prior attendance is demonstrated by the meeting and membership attendance roster. And the important sentence here is the last one. Bylaws may not otherwise restrict eligibility to vote by members in attendance. I believe that the requirement that to be a resident member of the council to vote for the election of the officers of the executive board is contrary to this requirement. There are two exceptions to two prohibitions or requirements that can be a prerequisite to voting. The one is the attending one meeting in the previous 12 months to vote on any issue before the council, or the requirement to have attended no more than two meetings in the preceding 12 months in order to vote for an officer or the executive board. But other than that, bylaws cannot restrict voting privileges. And in this instance, the Scenic Foothills Community Council proposes to restrict non-resident property owners, representatives of businesses, and nonprofits from voting for officers. So that is a restriction that is not allowed in code.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one correction, Darrell, because you said bylaws may not, which is kind of a different meaning, but it says it shall not.
Shall not,
So that's
sorry.
pretty, no, I just wanted to clarify that for the record. You know, it says shall. Anyway, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, our belief was that at the time that this was reviewed by the Assembly, one didn't even think of this particular possibility. And when we did this, we looked at it similar to the election of the Assembly. In no case is a business afforded a vote for the election of Assembly people. And so we just essentially patterned it after the election of the Assembly.
If I can
Go ahead, ma'am.
comment, Mr. Chairman. Well, according to the code, though, that's not the way it should be done. So that's my only comment. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so what do you want to do, Ellie? Sorry, Barbara.
I just have a question. I don't know about other community councils, but when there are business representatives that come to community council meetings, for example, my community council is Turnagain. So if somebody from the Rustic Goat, which is a business within the Turnagain area, comes to that meeting, and let's say the first meeting is J.J. Brooks. So he attended a meeting in the last year. If at another meeting, some other representative, but not J.J. Brooks, comes and attends that meeting, so that person has attended that year. For purposes of the voting requirement, does that mean that Rustic Goat gets a vote for attending 2 meetings in the last year, if that was a requirement? Or instead, it's not the business or representative that gets to amalgamate votes, it means that it's J.J. Brooks as the representative has to attend to, or his designee has to attend to. If that's the case, then I think it helps residents because it's more likely that businesses are gonna have different representatives coming to those meetings, and they can't amalgamate their votes. So anyway, that's just sort of a question and a theory. I don't know if that's what happens at your community councils or how it works.
For example, my community council, my Campbell Park one, we've got businesses, they're allowed to send one person to represent them. They can't send 10 to represent them.
Oh.
They've got one vote as the entity in our community council. We did that because we had some liquor stores come in and try and take over our community council various times. We restrict them to one vote. Instead of-
The code says that non-resident property owner, business owner, and nonprofit memberships shall designate a primary representative and may designate an alternate.
But they only get one vote.
Right, but they only get one vote. That's in the code also. But I would say if the primary comes to one meeting and the alternate comes to another, that's 2 meetings in
Okay.
2 to 12 months,
All right.
because they're representing the same membership.
Right, and that's something that the community council committee, and the assembly went over in, detail. Because there were lots of concern, by community councils about, having some meetings attended by no business members, and then business members coming and signing in and having 10 people represent their business. And so that's why it's one vote per
Entity.
entity, and the, as Darrell was saying, the designation of an alternate, a primary and an alternate, and if, and if that is, as he answered, was intended to be, the attendance at 2, to allow the attendance at 2 meetings.
Could I follow up on that?
Yes, Barbara.
Daryl, what do you anticipate happening if the business doesn't make that designation or the alternate? Then what does the community council do? What if they never make a designation?
Some councils require that even if you're representing a business, you show up, you sign the membership roster, and you write down, I'm representing this business. Several of them require a signed document from the chief executive officer of an organization and designating the representative for their organization, business, or property, and the same for the alternate. So most councils require designation in writing.
Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, to put this in context of our community council, because they're actually discussing something slightly different. But yes, we do have business memberships, and it is one, a business may only have one representative, but they can designate alternates and that kind of thing. So that's not an issue with us. A business could have attended, a business member could have attended absolutely no community council ever in their life, and can show up and have the right to vote on an issue on that first night they're there. So with all memberships, we have absolutely no restriction of voting on general issues. The only restrictions we have is that for purposes of voting in the election to the executive board, then the voting is essentially, their presence at that meeting and having been at one other meeting since the past election. So that sort of restriction is in there. And again, as I've said, the other restriction is then when it comes to voting for the executive council, the business membership does not vote. So that's the only restriction. All other times, the business member can show up and has a voice and has the ability to vote regardless of the prior participation.
Thank you. How many people show up to your community council? I've not been to yours.
Commonly it'll be fewer than 15.
Good. Good such community council, they've got some that,
it
if
depends.
5 show up, it's a miracle.
I would suggest, request to place a liquor store within our area, we'll have 100 people. So,
Yes, Darrell.
The other issue is qualifications to be an officer. The draft bylaws state that all officers must be residents or members of the council. And I think that is contrary to the charter and the code. Under 2.40.020, the purpose of this chapter is to implement the charter by providing a direct and continuing means of citizen participation in government and local affairs. The code recognizes our different criteria for being members of a council, but they don't recognize different levels of membership. And this proposal would create essentially a membership A and a membership B. Membership A has full rights, they can be officers, they can vote for officers. Membership B can be members of the council, but they can't be officers or they can't vote for officers. And to me, that is not something that was envisioned by the authors of our charter. Is not, it's not recognized in the code. Differing levels of membership. If you meet the criteria to be a member of the council, you are a member of the council. I don't believe that you can limit the rights of members.
You were talking about a business having representatives. How many votes they get? We had the same discussion on houses. Because we give husband and wife show up, husband and partner show up, they get 2 votes. There was one time when they were looking, do we just let them have 1 vote per house? And then we had some spouses that don't agree with their partner. So then we'd have a fight between whose vote was going to count. So we ended up letting everybody that shows up vote in the thing. Ms. Gray Jackson?
No comment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Do you want to take action tonight or what?
I would like to move on.
Go ahead.
Are we done with
Nothing
the
else.
issues? With all the issues?
No, those are the only issues. Other than that,
The only issues
bylaws
done.
they're great.
Okay, well, in my opinion, I think that, and this is just my opinion, I think they're minor issues, okay? But with that said, if, this community council isn't following the code, this community council needs to follow the code because it's the law as it stands today. So my recommendation is that,
We deny the appeal.
right, that we deny the appeal and that the community, the Scenic Foothills Community Council, reconvene to, amend their bylaws so that they, are in accordance with what the code says. No matter how much time it takes, that's what you need to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's your motion?
That's my motion.
Okay. So there's only 2 of us. I agree to your motion, okay? So we're going to deny the appeal from Scenic Foothills. We appreciate Scenic Foothills being here, but we want uniformity when it comes to the community council bylaws across the city. So,
Can I make one other comment?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank you and the rest of the council for your volunteer service to the citizens of this community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Any other business?